welcome to the Sharpe Way show. It is Wednesday evening, 7 p.m., and you have to look at my mug. Yes, you do. Absolutely. Thank you so much for showing up. You know what I'm going to ask you already. Yes, I'm going to ask you, please like, comment, share. It does matter. How in the world can people know what we're doing or let people know how we're trying to move forward if we don't like, comment, and share? We have to. So please do that right now. And again, obviously, if you got some cash, support the show. Patreon.com/SharpeWay. If you got those big dollars, you're making big money, throw me $100 a month. If you're not, no worries. $5 is fine, 25 bucks, $10, whatever you got, all good. If CBD is part of your health regimen, heading over to grownselection.com, make your purchase, put in Sharpe Way 20, get 20% off because I love you. And of course, if you want to have more conversations about politics in general, use the world's smallest political quiz at theadvocates.org. Take that quiz, send it to your friends, and let them know, hey, where do I stand? I am lucky today. I have with me a former member of the Libertarian Party, someone who had actually ran for the chair of the party back in 2018, ran for office, local office. I think it was in Michigan. Is that right?
Yeah, Warren, Michigan.
There we go. In Warren, Michigan, the man himself, Matt Kuehnel. Did I say it right?
You sure did.
There we go, Mike. How are you, Matt?
I'm real good, Larry. It's good to see you again. Good to talk to you again.
I am very happy that you came aboard. I know that in the past you considered yourself libertarian, and now you've kind of moved into another realm, something different. Can I ask, how do you self-identify as something political now?
Marxist Leninist.
You're a Marxist Leninist. That seems like a big swap in my mind. It does, right?
Yeah. It was a big jump I did from where I started, where I landed. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I know that the idea of being a Marxist, or Leninist, whichever is the right answer there. It seems that for many Americans, that sounds scary, right? And for my age, right? And my age, like it or not, we're running things now. My 50s, right? So when I was in the Marine Corps, in the 80s. We still had a USSR. We were scared of the Red Threat. Marxism and Leninism was very scary to us. How do you think that you see it now?
I see it as a liberation theory. It's both. The Marxism is more the basic force, the foundation, the idealism. Leninism puts it into practice.
So Marxism is kind of the basic concept of how things are going to be better. And Leninism is putting it into practice. Yeah.
Lenin wrote to be done, and then he did it.
You use China as, even though Marx was German, right, and Lenin was Russian, but you use China more as your go-to, right? The example that you use. Why China?
Well, for a couple of reasons. I think after the fall of the USSR, it was a big letdown to a lot of people on the left.
Sure.
China remained, and now they're that rising star. So I think, for one, their accomplishments. Two, I think it's because it's so industrialized, because it's so modern, their technology is so great. It's the closest thing that Americans could look to towards socialism, and how that could better our lives, not be what we envision to be poverty, which is usually where socialism starts, where China started.
Then the thing that I look at, right, and again, maybe it's because of my age. I remember in the 80s, and I spent some time, I've lived in Asia, not much time at all in China. I've only been a couple weeks in China. I spent a lot of time in Japan. And back in the 80s, we thought as Americans, oh my God, the Japanese are going to take over the world, right? This is back, those of you who are young, you don't remember this. But if you're in your 50s or 60s or 70s, you remember that we were afraid in the 80s, the Japanese were going to take over the world. In the 60s and 70s, Japanese products were looked upon as cheap products, right? Made from Japan was cheap, right? That was cheap. They had cheap cars and cheap this, and everything was cheap back then. Then all of a sudden, we started getting scared of them. And I'm going to show you, if you don't mind, a real clip real fast from a movie. This is a movie called Gung Ho. This is a trailer. It'll be a few minutes. It's a trailer from the movie called Gung Ho from 1985 or 6. I forgot when it was. It's the 80s. And it was about how we were afraid the Japanese were going to take over the world. And I lived in Japan at the time. I wasn't afraid. But a lot of people thought, oh, my God, the war was going to end.
Today is the big day. Give him hell, boy. Hey, I'll give it to him.
We're counting on you.
And this, of course, is about America after the 70s. We were having all those problems. Factories were leaving, and that's when this movie came out.
Mrs. Broniak, this face is on the case.
Hans Stevenson invited the Japanese.
You know, my dad was over here with the army in, I guess it was 1940. Hey, did you decorate this place yourself?
To put his town back to work.
Welcome to your first day with Hassan Motors.
So now it's Hassan Motors. They bring a factory to the town, and now there's a culture attack, right? It's a culture problem, right? The Japanese think one way and the Americans think the other. The Japanese are far more collective in their mindset than the Americans are.
Now, everything is on his shoulders.
Let's do it and do it our way.
I thought it handled great.
And it's all in the hands of Ron Howard, the director of Splash and Cocoon.
This is great.
What could possibly go wrong?
Good question. Let's go find out.
Of course. And the horrible gong, of course. Yes, I know. Bad, I know.
We must be a team. In Japan, our goal is a 0% defect. How'd you slip by? Everyone's thinking only of company.
See,
Right? Everyone thinking only of company, all that stuff. Now, why would I show you that? Here's why I would show you that. Because now we go back, if I can. Now we go to last year. Last year, Netflix had a series out called American Factory, which was basically the same thing, but it was a documentary. And guess what it was about? It was about Chinese factories. The same thing. So 33 years later,
but I'm extremely proud of the people that work in this plant here.
same plant. Everything is going under. Car factory is going under. And who comes in?
For a year and a half, I didn't have anything. We lost our home, we lost a vehicle.
I have struggled to get back to middle class again.
And here comes the Chinese.
This is a historic project that is going to help grow this community, give people jobs, and give
Same
a
thing.
future to your kids and my kids.
Now it's Fuyao versus Hassan, right?
Today, a General Motors plant, and now there are over 1,000 employees working here.
Is this a union shop?
It is our desire to not be.
No unions. Japanese didn't want unions. Chinese didn't want it either. Same idea like the Japanese. Now, the only reason why I show you that is I feel like we might be seeing this again. In other words, maybe 30 years from now, we're not scared of the Chinese. We're scared of whatever, the Vietnamese or the Burmese or the Koreans or whatever is the next thing. I guess my point of showing this is I feel like, and again, maybe my age is showing, but I feel like I've seen this movie before. And that I think that while the Chinese look good now, I think they're going to stagnate like the Japanese stagnated too. You have a view on that?
Yeah, I think it's not going to be the same this time.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. is trying to attack China the way that they attacked Japan. They attack Huawei the same way that they attacked Toshiba.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the results aren't the same. China is just growing their influence bigger, and the U.S. is isolating themselves and shooting ourselves in the foot with tariffs and wars.
Do you think that this is why someone like Trump was able to be as powerful as he was, or do you think that it didn't matter? That was going to happen either way.
I think that was going to happen anyway, just because of the Cold War mentality that so much of your generation has in them. They can't get over everything they've been taught about the USSR and Cuba and all these other places, Venezuela. They can't get over what they've been taught about it to learn about it. And so it's scary to them, you know?
So, yeah, I agree 100%. Let me ask this thing. You also talk about the idea of socialist internationalism. That's even scarier to me than just the socialist thing. That's even scarier to me. So why would someone like me want to even talk about that?
Well, look at the way that takes shape.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like how it was in the days of the Soviets when they're out arming all of these different nations.
Yeah.
China's coming in and they're building infrastructure.
Okay.
Roads, they're building power plants, they're building clean water, putting in all these things that help the people. They're not waging a war. They typically don't get involved with the local politics, but you see that solidarity with the relationship with Cuba or the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, where despite U.S. sanctions, they still aid those nations, and that's Socialist International.
Doesn't it bother you? And maybe it doesn't. If it's okay if it doesn't. But my worry with China going into Africa is China doesn't mind at all the idea of bribing local warlords, right? That's an okay thing in the Chinese model. I know America does it in a different way, but America still does try, I think, at least on the surface, to say warlord bad, right? Unless it's our warlord, but warlord bad. But China tends to say, no, warlord fine, I don't mind. So I've got to bribe you $1 million so I can build this railway, so I can get your iron ore out. Whatevs. I feel like they are assisting in exploitation and lengthening the amount of time that warlords can stay in place and oppress the people. Am I off on this?
I think the narrative, the narrative that U.S. doesn't help warlords and China helps warlords, that's who they frame as warlord. And I think without specifics, it's hard to say. But still, China's plan isn't to install military bases all over the world like the U.S. We know the U.S. supports terrorism when it helps their cause. I don't think you can say the same thing about China. You don't see them supporting terrorism unless it's, what the U.S. deems terrorists, like the legitimate government of Iran. I think their plan, and they make it very open, is the Belt and Road Initiative. What they're trying to do is create a giant world trade of free trade. They just signed the world's biggest free trade pact. So, they call it socialism with Chinese characteristics for a reason, because it doesn't follow any previous model. It is socialism to the Chinese culture, to the Chinese ethic, and to modern economics.
Well, you also bring up the idea of the U.S. left, and this I'd never heard before, should have some type of connection to the wealthy Chinese Marxists. And that, to me, the only example I have of that, right, is in New York City, which is many of the Chinese oligarchs many years ago, not as much now, but in the past, they had come to New York and purchased up tons of real estate, like mega real estate. And most of them were doing it because they were afraid of their own government. The oligarchs would purchase, for example, 3, 10, or $25 million apartments here in New York City. They wouldn't move into them. They would just put own three of them. They'd be empty. Then once their children were old enough, they would send their children to the United States to go to college. They'd write a check to get in, right? And then their kids would be here, or some of them would actually come over here with their wives on a tour to have babies here. So their children are now American citizens, and then they would come over, and whenever the government goes, you're a criminal, whenever that happens, they come here, they sell one apartment, $10 million, $20 million for cash, so they have their cash, and then they live in the other two or rent one more out, and that's how they can now live here in America, particularly their children. When I think of that mindset that I saw here in New York City, and you say the left connect with the Marxists of China, the wealthy Marxists of China, I feel like you're saying oligarchs are good. Am I wrong?
Well, if you notice, the oligarchs are running here, and they're using our laws to legally do what they do and retain their wealth and grow their wealth.
Yep.
So you look at China, the wealthy Marxists in the party make up a small fraction. There's 90 million members in the Chinese Communist Party, and it's not easy to get in. I mean, that's a third of our population, and it's not easy to get in. You got to have a high IQ. You have to, pass tests and go through rigorous, examination. You start at the bottom. you go to the smallest village and you don't get to move up until you brought their standard of living up. And that's the way Xi Jinping has started. He's worked his way all the way up to the top. So, you know, there's nothing inherently bad about being wealthy. What makes wealth unethical is when it's in the face of extreme poverty. And China just celebrated eliminating all extreme poverty in China. And they have, you know, 2 billion people there. In the 80s, when you may have remembered China, it was dirt poor, and 800 million people lived in extreme poverty. So, you know, you can say that, you know, yeah, there's maybe some people in the party that are wealthy. I don't think those are the people who really have control, especially when you look at the way their actual system is created. You know, the Communist Party does have a major role, but you still have the National People's Congress. You still have different political parties. You still have local control. You know, it's a very sophisticated system.
But don't you have a couple of concerns here? One, I would think one of the reasons for the poverty level going down is because they've been trading with the capitalist West, right? Throwing money into Europe, throwing money into America. We've been buying their stuff, right? Probably half the stuff in my house came out of China. I don't know that, but probably half the stuff in my house came out of China in some way, shape, or form, right? My utensils or my plates or whatever, my light or something probably came out of China. And again, isn't that not social? Isn't that literally capitalism that they were able to use to bring their people out of poverty?
No, it was guided very carefully by the Communist Party. You know, you look at the standard of living, how it's gone up. It was pretty much the Long March Part 2 is what we witnessed. And, you know, all American capitalists saw was cheap products, and they flocked. Mm-hmm. They used that capital to really improve to the point where they're about to overtake us in every single category.
For those of you who know what the Long March is, that's when Mao made his long retreat from his battle with Chiang Kai-shek. Was it 20s or 30s? I forgot when it was, maybe the 20s. He made his long march away into the woods where he was able to become more of a guerrilla fighter. It's 1920s, maybe. I think that's right.
So, I mean, basically that's what they did. A whole generation of Chinese sacrificed for their children. And, you know, you got to start there when your entire population is living in that extreme poverty.
Let me go to the other part that concerns me. And the part is the violence. The violence. And I want to be clear. This isn't black and white. I know the West, you know, bombs people and does violence too. Of course, I get that. What I'm saying is I'm concerned about the Chinese organized violence against minorities, the Chinese organized violence against its own population for those who want to have more than one child. I know that policy is kind of more lenient now, but for many years it wasn't. And I think it really did a disservice to the Chinese people as a culture. You have some villages in China that are almost 3-to-1 male to female because of it. You have, you know, a unhappy male population in many ways. Males want to leave the country because they can't find appropriate brides, the type of thing. Isn't that a necessary byproduct of this? Is the violence upon your own citizens?
I think there's going to be violence regardless, you know, at this stage in history. You know, as far as like the one-child policy, it was just necessity. There was still famines. They didn't have enough food to feed everybody. And that rule didn't apply to minorities, only the Han Chinese. So you still see the minority populations continue to rise, including the Uyghur Muslims and the various other ethnic groups they have there. So, you know, it's, again, I think it stems from their, what we would call in the Marxist world, material conditions. They had to start from here, and they had to make the necessary sacrifices in order to bring their living up to where it is today. Americans would be lucky if we adapted socialism because we don't have to start from that extreme point. We still have a lot of work to do, but it's, you know, we can see that, you know, like Deng Xiaoping, former premier of China, said, poverty is not socialism. To be rich is fabulous. You know, it's we want to improve everybody's material conditions, and that's what you see from China. It's not perfect. People aren't perfect. I don't think there's any ideal that could be put into practice with perfect results. But I think for the majority of it, when you look at China, there's so much to look forward to and positive and things we could adapt on our own, where, simply just using our resources less for war and more towards building high-speed rails and, things that are going to improve our conditions and improve our environment. And
so I guess I have three questions wrapped around this issue. One of them is, so you're okay, or you accept or expect a certain level of violence to move towards socialism to get to that next. You think there has to be some of that. That's
not even towards socialism. Just looking at this pandemic, people they have to be forced to do the right thing, and that's something I accepted, and why I don't consider myself a libertarian anymore. I see it. I see the mentality, the individualist mentality that I can do whatever I want, and I don't care how it hurts you.
Got it.
I don't even have to believe in it, and absolve myself of any guilt, So
okay, so that's where you are. I got it. Okay. Yeah. The other part I'm concerned about is now when you have a world where China controls their country, right, in their own way, if the rest of the world doesn't do that, is that an advantage for China? Meaning, if the whole world is, say, capitalist, as an example, and that I know that's not true, but I'm saying, for sake of argument, the whole world is capitalist, and then China's not. They're more socialist. Is that a good thing or a bad thing for China?
It would be a bad thing. I think they're doing fine, making friends with people who are capitalists. But really the entire goal of socialism is to achieve communism, and communism is something that can't be localized. That's a global theory. As long as the threat to socialism exists, you can never have communism.
So you think the goal of socialism is eventual communism, which has to be worldwide?
Yes. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So the idea of localism, not a good idea. I feel like if I look at Maoism, right, if I look at the Maoist theory, I feel like Maoism did have localism in his mindset. Am I wrong?
No. And in fact, modern China today, the local municipalities still have a large portion of control.
Okay. All right. You talk about the idea of moving socialism is the pathway out of colonialism. The only example that I can think of top of my head, maybe two, but really one, I think maybe is India. Maybe Burma, maybe Vietnam. I'm not really sure. I mean, you have a North Korean flag in your background. That is maybe North Korea would be another idea. Maybe, I'm not sure. But the socialist movements out of colonialism, I feel like they didn't do very well for their countries. I feel like if you look at socialist India, didn't do well. Poverty was horrible, civil war, until they took on more capitalist, concepts. North Korea, socialism after their liberation from Japan, much worse than South Korea in almost any measurable way that you can imagine. I feel if you look at a lot of the former Soviet republics, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, I think many of them have, a theory was socialist, but they all collapsed into dictatorships. Am I wrong with this? Did I miss something?
I mean, I think the idea that socialist countries are dictatorships is a false premise.
Okay.
A socialist ideal is very democratic. It's not democratic for the upper class, for the bourgeoisie. Lenin coined the term, or maybe it was Marx, but the dictatorship of the proletariat. What we call right now, what we have, we call it a democracy, but it's a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. It's the 1% that controls our government. It works for them. It doesn't work for us. So even though we get to vote, we're still living under a dictatorship of these small handfuls of people. Where a dictatorship of the proletariat is supposed to be the people having that control. So that's the ideal. That's what they're striving for. It's hard to thread that needle because as soon as you call yourself a socialist, you have the American government and their allies all waging economic war against you. Trade embargoes preventing you from getting medicine and food, and trading your resources because you're going to use those resources to better your people instead of enrich the capitalists.
So are you saying that there would be more socialist successes, except the capitalist countries are stopping their successes?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, look at the Cold War. That's what capitalist countries do. Everything was to bring down the USSR, and you look at foreign policy with the US now, it's to contain China, and that started under Obama. That was already like I said, China in the 80s was no threat. They used that to become a very powerful, influential nation, and now they're a threat. So once again, we're seeing a Cold War at the expense of the American people. We would be much better off having what China wants, which is just a mutually beneficial relationship where we trade.
I'm with you on the trade part. I am 100%. The only example I can see is India, right? I'm using India because India, when it first became independent, was very socialist, right? When it first became independent, not a whole 100% socialist country, but it was very socialist. And there wasn't a trade embargo against them by Americans or the West. I think they were accepted as a neutral country in general, right? They still had a connection to the British Empire, socially, economically. They still had a connection to the British Empire, still culturally to certain points also. I think many Indians came over to America. We didn't necessarily attack them or mean to them prior to 9/11, obviously, because we didn't know any better. But, after 9/11, we think everybody who's brown's a Muslim. But prior to 9/11, there wasn't really much, aggression against Indian population. But they had to become capitalist, I feel, to get their people out of poverty. I mean, they had horrible poverty. Gandhi talked about that like there's no tomorrow. And Gandhi, I think Gandhi thought that socialism was the answer. Localism, socialism. And I think his own people thought it wasn't. Am I wrong?
Yeah, well, the way I see it is that I don't think they were Marxist-Leninists in their practice.
Okay.
Where it was more like a Venezuela or a Bolivia. It was a social democracy. And they don't have the same success rate.
So help me out with that nuance, because here's what I'm sure. Most people watching and listening are saying socialism is Venezuela. And you just said it kind of wasn't. It's not Marxism, Leninism. So square that circle for me. Thread that needle for me.
Okay. So especially on the topic of colonialism.
Okay.
India at the time and Venezuela for some part, they still retain.
Go ahead.
They still retain their colonial governments, their colonial constitutions.
Mm-hmm.
Marxism, Leninism is about tearing that down and creating that strong dictatorship that no capitalist can puncture through.
Got it.
Like you see with Cuba, like you see with the DPRK, like you see with China.
So you're saying the real answer to creating this society is beginning with a dictatorship. That's the beginnings.
It sounds scary because they call it a dictatorship, but it's of democracy. It's of the people,
So you're saying that okay, so but that confuses me. So are you saying that Venezuela didn't start as a democracy?
Well, they started as a liberal democracy.
Yep.
Colonized democracy.
Yes.
Now I want to say they did scrap their constitution last year, but for a long time they were holding on to the colonial governments. And when you have that, you have like a Bolivia, that kind of situation where it's still very, very weak when it comes to like a U.S. coup, where we go, oh, you know what, we don't really recognize that election, and we want our guy in there. He's the one we think won.
Okay.
Able to do that. Where with something like Cuba, they were never able to do that with Fidel. They had that constitution that protected it from capital, from the influence of imperialism and colonialism and capital.
So I'm assuming Marxist-Leninism, I mean, its first real attempt was 1917 Russia. Is that pretty much true? That's the first real attempt at it?
It's one of those things, like Marx didn't call it Marxism. So,
right.
Marxism, Leninism was coined by Stalin.
Mm-hmm, sure.
So, I mean, but yeah, it would be close enough to say that 1917 was the real first.
Was the first stop. So for the past 100 years of certain countries grabbing different pieces of it, would you consider any country a success, or many of them, or which ones would you say, you know what, that's a win? That's a win.
It's one of those things where you can't say they succeeded yet, but they have many successes.
Okay.
That's how I view Cuba, Vietnam, China, the North Korea. I see so much where they improved the lives of their people, and they were successful in defending themselves from being taken over, having a coup and losing their government. They were able to keep this going. So in that way, I see it as success.
So I see that the ones I see. So the ones that you're saying are successful are those who were able to throw off the colonizers.
Yes.
Like so the Chinese able to throw off colonizers, Vietnamese able to throw off colonizers, Cuba throw off colonizers, North Korea throw off colonizers. That's your thing.
That and the material conditions of the people living there, the people at the bottom. When you see people who are completely deprived of every, what I would consider a human right, clean water, a roof over your head, a good amount of food to stay healthy, medical care. That's the first plan of action that they do. Education.
Got it.
That's the first thing they bring to these people, and they have a tough time because of all the pressure against them. But I think with China being where it's at now, I think socialist countries are going to have an easier time.
Okay. Well, I know that you no longer consider yourself a libertarian, but some people might consider themselves libertarians, and they might want to have a conversation like this with their friends. I'm going to give them a way of doing it right now. Hey, Larry Sharpe, host of the Sharpe Way, and I know what you're thinking. Election's over. Holiday season is here. I've got to have conversations with family and friends after this. I know it can be tough. How do you restart that? How do you reconnect? It's all about respect, guys. It's about mutual respect, human respect, respect for our family and friends. Well, how do you rebuild that? How do you make that happen now? You find some common ground. How do you do that? You head on over to theadvocates.org. Take the world's smallest political quiz. It's 1 minute, just 1 minute. You take that 1 minute. All of a sudden now, you now share that, send it to your friends. You start talking about things that matter to you, not about people you love, not about people you hate, but instead about issues that matter to you. Bring that back, have that common ground, find that mutual respect, find that human respect. Take this test and share it. Theadvocates.org. There we go. That guy's pretty smart. You should listen to him. Absolutely. Can I grab a couple of questions, Matt? Are you okay?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm fine.
All right. Tony thinks you went backwards. He said libertarian to Marxist. You're going backwards. Thank you, Tony. Ryan says he loves how I interview. Yes, I'm interviewing everybody. All ideology, 100%. Brendan says, I think Americans misuse socialism as a word. Welfare is not socialism. It's welfare. Socialism is the ownership of all capital goods by the people, either through co-ops or the state. If I had to pick one, I'd choose the first. You have any comment for Brendan?
Yeah, I think a lot of people try to put very rigid terms on socialism. And I think, Larry, you kind of touched on it before, where the American left is not always where I'm at in their solidarity with places like China. I think, especially from a Marxist-Leninist standpoint, it's very anti-dogma.
Okay.
We want to be over dogmatic. We don't want to spite our or what is it? Cut off your nose and spite your face. That's why you see places like China where they do adapt a lot of capitalist characteristics. But it's still within a framework that works for them.
Okay.
It's under careful supervision.
Well, speaking of that, do you consider yourself influenced by people like Bernie Sanders or AOC? I think a lot of people in America see Bernie Sanders and AOC as the torchbearers in America for socialism, right? I think that's a common outlook. Where do you stand on this?
I came from the right, right? And I consider even liberal to be a right ideology. It's an individualist ideology.
You consider liberal to be right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. All right. Didn't think I was going to hear that one today, but all right. All right.
Yeah. So I do have my own page. I didn't bother to link it, but it's anarchist memes for liberal teens, where I make fun of anarchists for being liberals. And
is that a Facebook page?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Can you say it again?
Anarchist memes for liberal teens.
Anarchist memes for liberal teens on Facebook. There we go. So if you want to go check them out, feel free to do that. Okay.
So that's my way of poking at liberals. But I think I started as a liberal. I think I just got more liberal because I think when you get into libertarian ideology, it's even more centered on the individual than it is the collective. So Bernie, he may have influenced me a little bit to start into socialism, coming from the right, hearing Ron Paul talk about socialism and being afraid of it. But they're not really who I look towards for inspiration now, I guess I'd say.
Okay. So I think Brendan has a joke. So which one of us will be the Uyghurs? But that is a problem, right? We are worried about when we create this to make the change. You mentioned sacrifice. I don't want to be the guy who gets sacrificed. I know I'm older. Maybe you get rid of me first. I don't want to be the guy sacrificed.
With the Uyghur situation, it's one of those. It's pumped by right-wing propaganda by CIA. A lot of it stems from Adrian Zenz. He's the sole person who comes up with this, and that the million number came from him just taking 5 testimonies and multiplying it for each province in Xinjiang and going, okay, there's 2 million people. So there's no real proof of it. What there is proof of is that there was terrorism in Xinjiang. Innocent people were being hurt.
Are you saying that there was Uyghur terrorists attacking Han Chinese? Is that what you're saying?
Not just Han Chinese, even other Uyghur Muslims. They were just attacking innocent people. They would run into a crowd and see how many people they could stab. They were getting radicalized in Turkey, where the U.S. actually recognizes them as terrorists. I think they just took them off the terrorist list this year, which I think was convenient. Now they're freedom fighters when they get to China.
Okay, so if I'm clear, you're saying Uyghurs are being trained in Turkey and then heading back to China and committing acts of terrorism.
Correct. So,
and the Uyghur stories that we hear, you're saying are exaggerated.
Yes.
Okay.
What they're doing is they're targeting those that they would see as susceptible to being pulled towards extremism. Those who are susceptible are those who are uneducated, illiterate, don't have a job, and so when somebody comes and says, hey, here's 30 grand and a bomb, go see what you can do, they're likely to take it. So what they do is they educate them. They teach them how to read, teach them how to write, teach them some job skills, some culture, just so they can enter Chinese society and live peacefully, have a job and not have to worry.
Okay. All right. I feel like in every time we've had any type of authoritarian world, whether it's a dictator of an individual, dictatorship of an oligarchy, dictatorship of proletariat, whatever that dictatorship is, that majority or mob rule, whatever that might be, I feel like the minorities are always the bad guys, right? It's the gypsies or the Jews or the Uyghurs or the Native Americans or the insert thing here. That's what I feel. And that's why the Uyghur issue is very believable for me, right? Because I've seen it in many other countries, not just China. And I actually have a degree in anthropology. And when I was in school in the 80s and 90s, they were talking about Uyghurs back then, right? It's not a new thing, right? I knew about Uyghurs back then, which is why my wife was surprised how I knew who they were and how to pronounce the UI. She was surprised that I knew that. I said, well, because I studied them 30 years ago. That's why I remember that. So I guess that part to me, I don't know whose propaganda that I would believe that makes any sense.
Yeah. And I'm honestly pretty believing of the Chinese over the U.S., but I think because there's a decent amount of evidence that they're not targeting people for celebrating their religion. People still do that freely. The Uyghurs have their own mosques and they have parades and festivals. What they target is separatism. When you have a frustrated group trying to take over the government by violent means, that's what they take serious. And that's what you see in Hong Kong is, the separatism. That's what they crack down on.
So you think that what they're doing, the Chinese are worried about in Hong Kong is not the idea of their markets, but their ideas of they're separate. They're not Chinese, right? They're not playing the game of being Chinese. You think that's why they're doing what they're doing in Hong Kong?
Yeah, I think any country, your borders are very special to you. The Hong Kong and Taiwan, they historically have been part of China, colonized. China set, an agenda to decolonize those areas. I think it's not so much about even culture. They're allowed to have their own identity there if they want. You have Tibetans, you have all these different minorities and ideologies and identities in China. It's more about them trying to separate, and place like Hong Kong or Taiwan or even Xinjiang, those are very important routes for trade for China. So it's just a matter of national security, and I think even the U.S. would not tolerate separatism.
Okay, all right. So in your view, like Hong Kong wanting to be independent or Tibet wanting to be independent is similar to our civil war in the South were independent and we went to war and then they go to war. You think that's a similar thing?
Yeah.
Okay. Tony says China's not Marxist anymore. They're more authoritarian. Now with the leader now, he's basically leader for life now, right?
All they did was abolish term limits. So he still has to run and they still have to elect him. The leader for life was another just kind of false narrative that Western media ran with.
So he abolished term limits.
Yes.
But in reality, I mean, this is a thing, right? Don't so many dictatorships create, the facade of voting to make people say, see, we're not a dictatorship. I'm Saddam Hussein and I got 99% of the vote again because the people love me. When there really is somebody else running, or Turkey, Erdogan in Turkey, where the guy running against him is his buddy or something like that.
I mean, I doubt the legitimacy of liberal democracies elections. You know what I mean? And we want to talk about term limits, but nobody wanted to term limit Ron Paul. You know what I mean? So with Xi Jinping, you have somebody very competent, very smart, who's doing a great job. There's no reason to get rid of him just to make some ideological whatever, have term limits. I don't think it's that big of a deal to abolish them.
Okay. No, I see where you're going. If I get your view is, look, the people need to be saved if they have horrible poverty like China and India had, and we have to install socialism to make everybody better. And if that means dictator on top is required, okay. If that means we need to have a proletariat, that's okay too, as long as the goal is to raise everybody up. Am I reading you right?
Again, though, it's not so much that Xi is a dictator. He's not a dictator. He works within the National People's Congress. He's a higher official in the Communist Party, but he's not a dictator. He doesn't set agenda by himself. Again, you have 90 million Communist Party members. You have another, 20 million people who are in these local government roles. It's a very democratic process. Xi Jinping is just the statesman. He's the face, just like we would have a president. He may have a bit more control, but I don't think he could ever act alone and keep his job.
Okay. All right. Rose says, well, a union could get in the way of supreme rulership. So that comes up to my idea of when the Chinese came to America and when the Japanese came to America in those two movies from 30 years apart, neither of them wanted unions. In Japan, there are unions, right? That run very differently than the unions in America are. The unions in Japan are per company. An entire company has a union, not a field, right? So it's not a union of pipe fitters. It is a union of this company. It's the company union. So the workers are negotiating directly with the management to make things work. And the Chinese that I know of don't have any unions. In the Marxist-Leninism world, are there unions?
Oh yeah, there are unions in China. When you talk about Chinese coming here and making money, it's dangerous to mix Chinese people with Chinese government officials enacting Chinese state policy. You know what I mean? It's a very Cold War mentality, and I think a lot of Chinese people are being targeted because there is that mix-up where people think Chinese, he must be part of some crazy government conspiracy, and that's why he's here. I don't blame China or a Chinese person for coming here and making money off non-union shops. It's not their country, it's not their concern so much. They're just taking advantage of laws. At the same time, I don't think that unions are as necessary when you have a government that's protecting you.
Don't most of these governments though have a lot of laws and rules against personal liberties, like prostitution, like smoking marijuana, like sometimes even dancing after a certain hour or something like that. Don't they have a lot of things like that that would stop people's happiness? It might raise, the socialists might raise the amount of money they make. That could happen, sure. Is it going to affect their happiness because they're not able to do the things they want to do?
I mean, to me, that's not a product of socialism so much as a product of the people. When you put the people in charge, like with China, they had their cultural revolution. Mm-hmm. They tried to destroy traditional Chinese culture and then the leaders and all that. But it didn't work, and it really backfired. A lot of people who lived through that did not think that was a great thing. And China changed. They embraced tradition. They embraced culture. So I think that's where you see some of the anti-LGBT laws of like the USSR.
Yep.
It's socialism with Chinese characteristics. They crafted their laws for their material conditions, and when we adapt socialism, if we do, it's not going to have those same characteristics because it's going to take on our American characteristics. And prostitution and drugs, you look at China with the Opium War.
Yep.
By the end of that, it was a staggering statistic, 40%, something crazy like that, of Chinese people addicted to opium.
It was a big problem. I remember. Yes.
They needed stiff drug laws. I don't think we need those here. I think, you look at Oregon where they decriminalized. I think that's a great step for what we face here.
So is there a step then, right? I mean, America is very far away from that right now, right? Mm-hmm. And afraid. So if you're in charge, how do you make a step to make America more like that? Is there a step that you do? Do you run an election as a socialist, right? Do you do what Howie Hawkins did and run as a socialist? Do you jump on the Bernie Sanders train and try to have influence in the Democratic Party? What do you do?
My thinking has been very nihilistic lately. I don't have a lot of hope for the U.S. at this time. I think right now all we can do from my side is educate. But otherwise, I think anytime you see any kind of threat to the system, it gets taken out immediately. We're in the heart of imperialism. They just won't let it happen. They'll let Kyle Rittenberry go out and shoot some protesters, but they're not going to let some Michigan militia members kidnap the governor. You know what I mean? And you look at the Black Panthers, the moment you really start to threaten their system, you get taken out pretty quickly.
See, you spoke about that too, right? One of the things you mentioned was you were talking about the left in this case. You were saying the left didn't like Trump, right? So they were happy to get rid of Trump, but they weren't happy they didn't want to get rid of the system. They still love the system that, in your mind, produced Trump. So you think there's no way to fix the system?
I think America is a failed experiment in hyper-individualism. I think it was crafted to protect the wealthy, to be a haven for oligarchs, for inherited wealth to flourish. So I don't think there's any reforming this system. I also don't think this system's going to let us reform it.
So let me go back, though, to what you'll hear everybody talk about, what I've seen myself. While there's no doubt that the wealthy do well in America, absolutely no argument. What about the idea that so many people have come here who had almost nothing? You hear the stories all the time, had almost nothing, and grew to make so much of themselves, whether through education or, I mean, look at our Supreme Court now. Our Supreme Court now, I think 7 out of 9 are Catholics. And if you go back 100 years, Catholics are looked upon very lowly in most American cities, right? Those damn Irish, those damn Italians, right? They were looked upon very low. And many of those families were able to get their kids educated, hyper educated, and they became judges in our Supreme Court now. I don't see that in other countries much at all. A little bit here and there, but no way. If you look at something, for example, Germany, look at the Moroccan community, their Turkish community. I don't see as much growth in that. North African community within France, I don't see that either. Pakistani community in the UK, a bit. Indian Pakistani, a bit, but nowhere near as much as we do. Isn't that an advantage or no?
I think for a long time, just because our position in the world after World War II, the U.S. was where you wanted to be. Our standard of living was no doubt higher than just about any other country. I think that stopped being the case after the 80s and definitely now. My generation, you look at millennials, they own, 13% of the economy, where our baby boomers owned 60% when they were our age. Home ownership rates, everything's going down.
No, I agree. The millennials, and I say this all the time, millennials got a raw deal. And I hear people all the time scream and yell about, oh, millennials this, millennials that. And my answer is, if you're a millennial now, you got out of school or were just working during the first crash. So there was nothing for you. And you were told your entire, as you're growing up, just take these tests, pass these tests, and you're going to have this great job waiting for you, and life is good. And they were throwing money around in 2006, 2007, 2008. I know I was getting some of it. And then all of a sudden, things crashed, and now they have nothing. And then just they begin to build back up a little bit. We got the COVID crash and the debt crash after that. If I'm a millennial, I'm thinking socialism might work too for me too. I mean, I get it. I mean, the system isn't working for the youth, for the young. I see that and I get it. And we have to have a better message and a better answer. I totally get that. So, all right. So let me grab a couple more if I could. Let's see. Capitalism hasn't rid the U.S. of extreme poverty. I'm not sure that's true. Is there much extreme poverty in the U.S.?
By World Health Organization standards, is that who sets the standards? I want to say we do have a percentage, not very large, but it's always been there that lives on less than $1 a day.
Yeah, I mean, there's poverty in America, obviously. I mean, that's an obvious thing is poverty. I don't think there's extreme poverty much at all in America. I mean, there's some of it. I mean, there's some of it now in India still. The COVID response will devastate India. India still, sub-Saharan Africa is a lot of poverty. Southeast Asia, a lot of that, but not much in America. Not much in North America. I mean, some in Mexico, but not much in North America at all, relatively. So, yeah. All right. So he says capitalism has also rescued more people from poverty than any other system ever. I hear that often. What's your take on that?
I think that's a false premise. You could say, yeah, their life improved because now they're living on $1 a day compared to less than $1 a day. But I think, capitalism does serve a purpose, but when it's true capitalism, where it's somebody going out and exploiting people, they would have been better off under a better management.
Talking about exploitation, let me go down that road for a second. When it comes to exploitation, I feel like I've seen so many Chinese immigrants. And again, I have a biased view of New York City. So keep that in mind when I'm speaking, right? That's what I see. So that, and some people who don't live in New York City may not get this. But what I see is, most of these New York City sweatshops, these are Chinese exploiting Chinese. I mean, they are literally exploiting themselves far worse than American would exploit American. I mean, it's not even close. Far worse.
And those are the people that ran from China. You know what I mean? Because they're not able to exploit like they are here.
So you think they came to China, left China because they couldn't exploit?
Oh yeah, and I think you see it now still, where it's all the Hong Kong protesters that are getting prosecuted right now, pleading for U.S. amnesty, And who do they take in? They take in the billionaire, corrupt guy from the law, Guo Wengwai, hanging with Steve Bannon, making up fake news, you know?
No, America does have that idea of actually bringing in, right, wealthy people. That's true. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think it's those who choose to come to America and believe in the liberal ideology tend to have a negative view of China, and especially the Communist Party, and tend to embrace those capitalist, individualist ideas of exploiting.
Is cannabis legal in China? Do you know?
I don't believe it is. No.
Yeah, I don't think it is. But CBD is legal all over. Listen to this real fast. Hey, it's Larry Sharpe, host of the Sharpe Way show. Want to talk to you for a couple of seconds only about CBD products. Look, if you think that they should be part of your health regimen, or they already are, you're dealing with maybe pain or anxiety or some other issue, head on over to grownselection.com. Check them out. They're a libertarian-owned company. They understand that you own your body and should treat yourself the way you think you should be treated. Of course they do. You do too, and so do I. So head over there, check them out, look at their CBD products. If you think they fit your health regimen, put in Sharpe Way 20 and get 20% off your order. Look, I want you to support the Liberty Movement, libertarian-owned businesses, and the show. They're a sponsor. If CBD is or should be part of your health regimen, grownselection.com. Check them out. Purchase Sharpe Way 20 for 20% off. Support the show. Support the movement. grownselection.com. That guy's smart. So I want to bring up a couple of points, right? Joe says he agrees the boomers have failed his generation, but preaching that everything is equally and getting a trophy for everything. Not sure about that. Instead of teaching them to fight for yourself. He's saying they should fight for themselves. Okay, that's it. His point is yes, he agrees, but the millennials have to fight for themselves.
We should be more individualistic.
Well, there's a point that Colin brings up here. He says, how can you champion civil liberties, women's suffrage, gay rights, and religious tolerance, then yet complain about hyper-individualism when all these great things weren't possible without it? So I guess Colin's point is, if you don't have the hyper-individualism, how do you get the women's suffrage? How do you get the gay rights? How do you get religious tolerance without just having, the tyranny of the proletariat saying, we're all Russian Orthodox, so you must all be Russian Orthodox, or we're all straight, so you must all be straight?
Well, I mean, I don't think that being gay or anything like that, or being a woman came from being an individual. Those are just things that people are. They're born that way. That's not from an ideology. That's not from individualism. Expressing those may be individualistic, but I think it really conflates. When I say hyper-individualistic or hyper-individualism, I'm saying this is beyond just normal being an individual. This is where it's every man out for themselves. Don't worry about your neighbor. Who cares if you step on a couple heads to get where you are? You know what I mean? Like, we live in a culture where it's dog eat dog is our culture. We are out to compete. We are not out to save each other. That's what I mean by hyper individualism. And I don't think that has anything to do with feminism or anything of that nature.
All right. So you think that these same types, and the reason why I bring this up is that I look at us meaning Americans, look at us in the early parts before we became a country, right? Look at us in the early parts, 1600s, 1700s. I mean, we had laws and rules that were total collectivism, right? You had to go to church on Sunday or they put you in a stockade, right? I mean, I think that was a common thing. And I think the individualism was us packing up and saying, I'm out and I'm heading out west to go, see if I can survive with the Native Americans, right? And kill them, sadly. But that was what we decided to do, right? I mean, that was the hyper individualism. And I feel like that's what got us out of that piece, if that makes any sense, right? That West did that.
Well, I guess when I say hyper, I mean like beyond reasonable, where I think that was reasonable individualism to want to get away from puritanical rule. Just like, there's been some failed experiments in hyper collectivism. When you go all in for an ideology and a dogma, and you don't concern yourself with the results of what's actually happening to people, you're going to have some pretty disastrous results. And that's why I say, socialism with Chinese characteristics, I think, is a great model, because it's not hyper collectivism. It's a very blended mix of, individualism and also collectivism. Prosperity is encouraged, but not at the expense of the community.
Okay, I get where you're going with it. I appreciate it. So, Matt, is there anything you want to bring up before we wrap this up?
I just want to say that I enjoyed my time as a libertarian. It was, not just the educational, but also the people. I know me and you, Larry, we've had our disagreements, but I think you're a stand-up guy, and I love talking to you.
I appreciate it.
If I could say anything to some of the libertarians that I used to know, it was hurtful, that you lose those people you thought were friends because you just changed your mind, or you learned some new information that counters what you were, talking about. I seen one comment on your page that, I'm just out for personal gain and to get attention. Maybe when I was running for politics, and I think that's the name of the game when you're running for office, but I've been quiet. I've been sitting back. I didn't even vote this time. It's just good to talk to you. So I appreciate you having me on, and, hopefully it helps and people learn some stuff.
Absolutely. Love it. Hey, I want to make sure that this whole show is about talking to everybody. Doesn't matter who it is, everybody. So when I knew you were a passionate guy, I saw you on that stage. I saw you screaming and fighting the good fight. So I remember that's why I wanted to have you on.
Oh, well, I appreciate it, Larry.
All right, guys. Thank you, everyone, for watching. I appreciate it. Thank you for listening. And, of course, Matt, thank you for coming on. I will not be on Turkey Day, but I will see you all on Friday.